Hey guys, welcome to the first part of this guide where I'm going to be showing you one of the ways that you can make a Game Boy Zero using entirely custom and aftermarket parts, which means that no original Game Boy part, working or otherwise, will be sacrificed to make this Game Boy Zero, which is pretty awesome. This set of parts that I have right here is literally everything that I'm going to need to make this, and if you watch the original guide, you'll notice just how much simpler this is in terms of the number of parts that you need. So first I'll just go over everything that I'm going to be using. This is an aftermarket case that I got off of eBay for like $10, pretty much an exact copy to an original Game Boy. I've got a few here that I compared it to, and yeah, I'm really happy with the quality of this. For my X and Y buttons, I'm using NES buttons that I got from Kitsch Bent, so they're concave like the X and Y buttons on the Super NES, which I like. The green buttons are from a place called Handheld Legend, and the rubber pads underneath you can buy on eBay for a couple of bucks. I've got the same speaker that I used the first time around from Adafruit. For the screen, I'm going to be using a backup camera screen that a lot of people on the forums have had good luck with. You can get this on Amazon for like $15 or $16. I'm using a 2500 milliamp hour battery this time around. That's from Adafruit, and then I've got the Power Boost 1000 to go along with it. I've got the same micro USB charging port from SparkFun that I used the first time around. I've got a power strip that Helder designed that we can use to distribute the power from our Power Boost to power our screen and a Raspberry Pi and everything like that. So this will keep us from having to make one of those by hand. Got an extension JST cable so that I can put my Power Boost anywhere in the case that I want to. A few odds and ends like USB ports, power switch, headphone jack, volume wheel, and tactile switches for L and R. Then of course the Raspberry Pi Zero. I've got a cartridge micro SD card adapter from Pre-Runner Seth on the forums. And if you're wondering how I'm going to use that, since we're using an aftermarket case and it of course doesn't come with a cartridge reader, you can actually use the Game Boy Advanced cartridge reader from a DS Lite, which you can buy these separately on eBay for a couple of bucks. You have to trim off a couple of pieces to use it, but other than that it works great. And actually the pins are all side by side rather than alternating in and out like on the original Game Boy, so it's actually a lot easier to connect your wires to as well. I've got a cartridge label and a screen protector from Dominator on the forums, an aftermarket cartridge from Kitsch Bent, a 3D printed screw bracket and button wells that I designed and printed out, and then at the heart of it all, I've got this all-in-one button PCB from Helder on the forums, which includes our USB hub, our Teensy, audio filter, and audio amplifier all in one board. So this is responsible for a lot of the simplification of parts that we have this time around. So yeah, this should be much easier and faster to put together than the first build. So let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is modify my case, and I'm actually going to skip over that since I already showed that in the first guide. So if you'd like to see that, check out the first part of the original guide. The only difference is I'm going to leave a couple of millimeters around the edge here to accommodate this screen cover. But if you're not going to use one of those, then you don't have to worry about that. One thing I do want to mention about this all-in-one board are these holes in the middle of the X and Y buttons. Those are so that you can put the board inside the case as you're about to drill out your X and Y holes, and use something like a tiny screwdriver or drill bit and mark exactly where you need to drill. So, super handy and a really nice touch by Helder. Alright, so I've got the front of my case all done here. The edges are a little bit rough right here, but that doesn't matter because the screen cover is going to cover all that. One thing I did do a little bit differently this time was rather than gradually expanding the buttonholes using a Dremel, I used a Unibit from Irwin. You can get these at Home Depot or at Lowe's, and it makes this so much easier. All you have to do is look at the side and find the diameter that you want your hole to be, and then you just drill your hole and stop when you get to that point. And you wind up with nice, clean, perfectly round holes exactly where you want them. So yeah, what used to take me like 20 minutes to do took maybe 5. And for this particular one, you want to stop on this third notch here, so that your holes end up being just a little bit over 11 millimeters. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and install my screen. A lot of people on the forum seem to be having good luck with this screen. I guess the brand is BW, and it's on Amazon for like $15 or $16. I'll put a link to it in the written guide that goes along with this. But fair warning, even if you buy this exact same item, you may wind up with a different variant of this same screen that looks exactly the same on the outside, but on the inside is totally different. Another screen that I've seen a lot of people use is this one from GearBest. It's really nice because it doesn't have a case around it, kind of like the Adafruit screen. You know exactly what you're getting when you buy it, and it's really easy to modify to work off of 5 volts. I just happen to already have the BW one, so I went ahead and used that. Now be really careful at this part when you're removing the screen from this cover. It's attached really well with some double-sided tape. I've actually already broken one of these trying to remove it. And there we go. So definitely a little bit of work to get it out of the case there, but It's like 15 bucks compared to the Adafruit screen at like 50. Alright, so this is the controller board that came in mine. It's kind of just luck of the draw which version you get. But if you happen to get this one, it's really nice because it's super small. It's like a third of the size of the Adafruit controller board, and it's really easy to convert it to run off of 5 volts. It will work off the 5 volts right out of the box, but I noticed some flickering, so I went ahead and converted it. Somebody put some instructions on the wiki for how to do this particular board. You just run a wire from this regulator right here on this pin to your red wire, and that's it. After I did that, all the flickering went away and it works great now. But this only applies if your board looks exactly like this one. There are several different kinds of controller boards in this screen, so if yours doesn't look exactly like this, don't freak out. Just head over to the forums and the wiki. There's a good chance that somebody has already figured out how to do this for whatever version of the board you get. One sort of interesting thing to note about this board and a few others that I've seen is that while you might think that this is your composite signal and this is the ground for your composite signal, this is actually composite input 1 and input 2. So if you look on the back, you can see that it says AV1 and AV2. So this board actually has 2 inputs that it can use. So when you hook it up, all you need to worry about is wiring up your power, and then the yellow wire goes to your TV pin right here. And again, this only applies to this board, but I've seen several other boards with similar setups, so it's worth mentioning. And just like last time, it's a good idea to go ahead and wire this up and make sure you didn't damage anything. I'm going to go ahead and speed through this part, but if you need more detailed instructions of how to do that, check out part 3 of the original guide that I did. The process is exactly the same as it was for the Adafruit screen. Alright, so I'll go ahead and mount my screen now, and again I'm going to speed through this part because I already covered all this in part 2 of the original guide. So be sure and check that out if you want to see more detailed instructions. Alright, so now for the 3D printed screw bracket. This is the screw bracket that I showed how to make in part 3 of the original guide, and you had to be really careful to measure just right and make sure that everything lined up. It was just kind of a pain and it was really messy. With this, you just stick it in, push it all the way to the top, and glue it down. And that's it. So that's like half of part 3 of the guide in like 30 seconds. Much nicer. And once your glue is cooled off, you can go ahead and put it together and test it out. And that's it for the screw bracket. Now I'm going to attach my 3D printed button wells for my X and Y buttons. These help hold your buttons in place and keep them from twisting as you use them. It just makes it feel a little bit nicer and sturdier as you push them in. If you're using rubber pads from a Game Boy, which is what I recommend, then you're going to want the slots on either side of your button wells to be horizontal just like the ones for the A and B buttons. And after you line them up, you just glue them down. It doesn't take much. And that's it. Now we have button wells for our X and Y buttons just like the A and B buttons. Alright, so now I'm going to put my buttons in there and mount my all-in-one board. But before I do that, I'm going to attach a few wires just to make things a little bit easier later on. I'll connect some for the first 2 USB ports. I'm actually not going to use the third one in my build. The wires that will connect to the USB port on the Pi itself, and some wires for the L and R buttons. Everything else on here, like the PWM audio, headphone and speaker, and volume wheel, we can still access pretty easily after we install it. And if you have one laying around that you're willing to chop up, the best place to get wire for this is from a USB cable, because it's already color-coded for you, and if it's a decent one, it'll already be appropriately gauged for the power and the data lines. Alright, so you can see the order on these goes ground, data positive and negative, and then 5 volts. I've wired up 2 of the USB ports, one of them with about 8 inches of wire so that I can have it go to the other side of the case, and I can trim it down if I need to. And then the other one's pretty short because this is going to be an internal USB port, which I'll use for Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or anything like that. And then finally I've connected wires to these pins right here, which will go to the Raspberry Pi for the data wires, and then our power strip for ground and 5 volts. Now for my L and R buttons, you'll notice I only connected one ground wire, That's because on the other side of the case, I'm going to join the ground pins on the L and R buttons. So that way I only need to run 3 wires to the other side. And this is the headphone jack that I got. I got it off of eBay. It was a whole bag of them for a few dollars. This pin is ground. This is our left channel. This is our right channel switch, our right channel, and our left channel switch. And what I mean by the switches is, when headphones are not plugged in, then our switches would be sending a signal to our speaker. So this pin configuration is for this specific headphone jack, but it'll be similar for most 5-pin headphone jacks that you find. And the way we're going to hook that up to the all-in-one board, the naming might seem a little bit off, but Helder said that he'd be fixing that in future revisions. This pin that says switch here will go to our ground pin, and then this will go to our left channel, and this will go to our right channel. Alright, so I've got yellow as my left channel and green as my right channel, and these two are going to connect to the all-in-one board, and these two are going to connect to the speaker. And you might be wondering how I'm going to connect 2 channels to one speaker. You can try just combining them and wiring it up to the speaker, but you may find that you're not really happy with the sound quality out of that. So what you can do is put a couple of resistors between these wires and where you join them together to connect them to the speaker. You can use a pretty small resistor for it. People have been using 10 ohms in the forums. The smallest one that I have is 22 ohms on hand, but that should work alright as well. And then the other thing that people have been doing to reduce noise and make it sound a little bit better is putting some ferrite beads around the wires that will be joining together to connect to the speaker, as well as the ground wire. I don't have any of those on hand, so I'm going to have to come back and add those later, but I'll link to the threads where people are talking about that in the written guide that goes along with this. Those resistors and the ferrite beads, Helder has mentioned that he may be adding those to a future revision of his all-in-one board, so definitely keep an eye out on the forums for that. Alright, so now the right and the left channel are being joined together with a resistor in line for each channel. And then I've connected the other wire on the speaker to the ground pin on the headphone jack, which will then be connected to the ground pin on the all-in-one board. And if you want to test this out before gluing anything down, which you should, then we can go ahead and wire this up to the all-in-one, and then connect our PWM pins to a Raspberry Pi and test it out similar to how I did in part 5 of the original guide. So if you want to see more detailed instructions of how to set that up and test it, you can check that out. And make sure that you connect your 5V and ground inputs on the all-in-one board to your Raspberry Pi, otherwise your amplifier won't have any power. The biggest thing that you need to know when you go to test this is that you do have to have your volume wheel hooked up in order to actually test it, otherwise you won't hear anything. It's really easy, they're all labeled. The bottom one is ground, and then you have pins 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if you're holding your volume wheel like this, you can just hook them up in order. And that's the sound of the Quake demo running, so we're good to go. And if you need to, you can put a piece of plastic or something like that underneath your headphone jack to raise it up a little bit. And like I said, I will be coming back and redoing some of this once I can get a hold of some ferrite beads, so don't judge me too harshly on how messy this is right now. And I think I'm going to end it there for the first part of this guide. I was going to show a couple other things like mounting the volume wheel and the display driver board, but I've got something that I want to try out first that might make that a little bit easier. So I'll save that for next time. I'm hoping that we can maybe squeeze everything else for this build into one more video, but we'll see how that goes. So stay tuned for the next part, and I'll see you guys next time.